All right, so let's jump on in it with Florida. So they are in year one of the Billy Napier program. He used to be the Furman quarterback back in late 90s, early 2000s. He helped at Clemson and Alabama, and he's been the head coach for the past 4 years at Louisiana. Went 40 and 12 over there. Was arguably one of the top non-Power 5 coaches out there. And so this is pretty exciting that he's getting his opportunity in a rich tradition program like Florida, who won back, titles back in the mid 2000s or late 2000s, but had a couple of good seasons with Dan Mullen, but then that came pretty crashing down, especially with just different things going on in the program and just the on-field performance not all the way living up to. It just felt like it kind of fell down after they made that appearance in the SEC title game a couple years ago. And so now you've got Billy Napier trying to rebuild Florida program and also put his own image into it. He's been known to have pretty big staff. I want to say it's like 60 or so personnel for the program, which has been really big. It's really interesting with these first year coaches, how they approach with this whole trying to jump in on board with recruiting and putting in your identity and having your mark on the program, but also having some realistic expectations for what they're taking over. I think culture is a word that's used a lot, and it's hard to know what that, I mean, people have different things of when they think about what that, and a lot of people can say culture, but then what they're trying to do and build into that. I think Billy Napier is a great coach, and I'll be really interested to see what he's trying to do. It's been looking like their style of like practice is documenting everything, has all these assistants trying to chart all these different parts of the program, really trying to know down to the nitty gritty of what's going on. And he's had that success at Louisiana and wanting to see if that's going to translate. I mean, they were ranked as a team, as Louisiana is not a traditionally team that's even ranked in the top 25. So you're taking a Florida program where you have the talent in the state of Florida, and arguably now that was a little bit of a tough issue because you have Dan Mullen's like quote of like, we do recruiting in the off season. Well, in today's day and age, you can't really do that, especially with NIL. So it seemed like they were getting off to a kind of a slower start with that, but now it's really picked up. But you have, you're fighting against schools like Florida State and Miami traditionally, and then you have schools like Clemson and Alabama and Georgia all in your backyard trying to get your guys. And so really, if they can keep all these Florida guys at home, which as of recently, they're starting like a really good class. It looks like top 10 class as of this recording. So what do you do with that? And like I'm saying, what do you do? Like what do you do to keep those guys at home is what I mean. And I think that's a big key because it's not like the players aren't there. It's just wanting to keep more of those Florida guys home. If they can do that, they have the talent to really capitalize on that. And then it's with developing them into being that competitive in the East again. I think Georgia's clearly the mark right now, and Florida wants to be that again. And so I think this hire could be really big. Push with that. Traditionally in the past, they've run 11 personnel, what they did at Louisiana. So that's like one wide receiver, one running back, one tight end, excuse me. And so I'm expecting to see a lot of that. He used his quarterback at like that mobility and be able to get quick decisions out there. And so I could see that being a really interesting dynamic with Anthony Richardson, the star, who's a star freshman last year who came over and took over for Emory Jones. So that's a really interesting part I want to see with that, is that can they get back to that dynamic offense and really be forcing these defenses to scheme around them for sure. So as you look overall in this program, a lot of different preseason magazines or different outlets have them around that 3 to 4 mark, depending on who you ask. Our composite of top ratings, preview magazines, has them at like 4. And so I think the big question for them is, what are the expectations when it comes to Florida? Because are they going to compete all the way with Georgia for the SEC East title. I don't know if that's really a fair thing to jump in right away. Now, can they turn it around really quickly in year 2 and year 3? I think if they hit on these recruiting classes, I think that's very realistic. But for a team, I mean, they went 6-7 last year, 2-6 in the East. That's just not acceptable at a school like Florida. And so I think you get back to that 7-8 win mark, maybe 8, is a really good opportunity for them to build on and kind of even taking the bookmark of what they're doing at South Carolina and hitting higher than they thought year 1, and then year 2 hoping to build on that. But also you don't want the expectations to become exponential when the team's not all the way ready for that, when they are trying to rebuild. So obviously the key for them is this team is as good as Anthony Richardson can take them. And I mean, he didn't have all the stats last year because he was filling in part of the way. Threw for 529 yards, 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I think, you want to cut down a little bit with that TD to INT ratio. He had 3 rushing touchdowns, 400 yards on the ground. So the possibility is there. It's just, can they unlock him? And I think also, too, do they have dynamic playmakers at like receiver and running back so it's not all on his shoulders? Because you can have a great quarterback, but if it's all on his shoulders, it's not, you can't unlock it at all as much, because when you have to have other threats you have to be aware of. So I think it's really big when it comes to their running backs. You got Naquan Wright, Montrell Johnson. Johnson is a Louisiana transfer, so as of course with some of these coaches, you'll get some of those guys transferring over. So he had 838 yards, 12 touchdowns. I could see one of those 2 guys taking over or doing some kind of dual running back. But if they can establish that running game, for sure, especially with the legs and the ability that Richardson has, I think that'll really help wide receiver, because wide receiver, they just needs a couple guys to really be big. You have like Justin Shorter, Xavier Henderson, Ricky Pearsall, who led Arizona State in receiving yards and touchdowns. Shorter had 500 yards receiving. They each had a couple touchdowns. Someone's got to step up in that. And I think if you establish the run, especially, then you can have some of those bigger chunk plays down, because you're only having one-on-one coverage on the back end, and you just have to be aware of just being aware of the run. So I could see RPO definitely being a factor for them. I'd be curious to see how much they utilize that if they do. So that's the thing for offense, is that I think they'll have some ability. A huge marker for them, I think, won't be as big, is that the turnover margin, they lost by 8 last year. I mean, you just can't do that. And I think so offense has to take care of the ball, but defense really needs to be more opportune, because is the word I want to use, just for capitalizing on that and really giving the offense some more opportunities. This defense really needs to be improved. I mean, they gave up some big plays because they, were holding, passers under about 200 yards. They just gave up explosive pass plays. I think these are some key stats. They give up explosive plays. They were 100th in rush and 71st in pass in the country with explosive plays. So they could hold, some teams down, but then they would give up the big play, the big chunk play. And I think especially the DBs are going to be very interesting to watch. And you have a guy like Jason Marshall, who could be a real star for them. But I think that's the capitalizing for them. And I think with defense, you're getting a new defense, trying to get those personnel over, is that can they stop the explosive plays? Keep them in games. Like, you can give up some chunk yards, or give us some yards, but you don't want to give the big touchdown, the big thing. I think if they can control the ball, maybe be a little more methodical, but just they're the ones being the aggressors versus like getting the big plays hit on them. So last one I thought was really interesting. Shout out to Pick Six Previews for this, but they were actually 4th in yards per carry, and he has a rating that's called O-line run push to see how much of the O-line is actually getting the push for them. They were actually 4th in the country when it came to both of those. So how much of that was like Emory Jones, like in his running ability? It's hard to say, but I think that if that kind of stat can even just be remotely close to that, I think that's a really big upside for them. But when it comes to them, I think that's the threshold I'm kind of seeing, is that maybe that 8-win mark, because right off the bat you got Utah, then you've got Kentucky, at Tennessee early. You have to play Georgia. They get Texas A&M. There's some hard wins in there. I mean, that's so I'm saying 8 wins is maybe like about a marker that I'm kind of looking at. Is that successful? 7, 8 wins, go back to a bowl game, finish the year strong. So there we go. That is 2022.